What's up, Power Painters? This is Taylor Payton of TayPayArt.com and PowerPainters.org coming to you today with another Power Painters tutorial. So in this tutorial, it is part 2 of how to paint with form, how to add form to your paintings, however you want to parse it. This is basically another tutorial where I'm going to be showing you in sort of a time-lapse format how you can use values and other fundamentals at your disposal to give your work more dimensionality. And the basic way to do this is just to figure out what your fundamental tools are and know how to look for form and how to create form. So we're going to be talking about those things in this 10-minute tutorial. So first I'm just laying in a very rough drawing, just getting my basis down here. I'm going to do some skippage throughout the video in terms of just cutting to different parts that are relevant to what I'm going to be saying, but usually I like to start with some sort of rough drawing, some sort of structure, even if it's going to change a little bit down the road. And in this case, it was just a male humanoid one, sort of a semi-relaxed pose, and it wasn't something I was worried a lot about. Sometimes I like to noodle on the forms while I figure out where I want to go with it, what I want the proportions to be, what I want the pose to be. This is my phase where I just get sort of sloppy, but also establish enough information for things to move forward, which is basically the goal there. Now, as I transition to the next point, that's basically having a reasonable drawing that I can begin to lay on some values. So the value stage is where I just lasso tool everything, and the shortcut for that is L, and I draw around the contour with the lasso tool so I can't paint outside of it, and then I just paint something underneath all the line art, and then I end up flattening it all down in the layer menu. So that's just basic Photoshop stuff. If you don't know it, then I highly recommend checking out my Photoshop for Beginners tutorial in this very YouTube channel. I'll link it in the description box for convenience. Other than that, it's basically time to start adding the form. And as you can see, I've sort of delineated things already with line because I wanted to know where the form would turn, give myself an idea of where I can start adding the shading. After I add that flat base, which is just a sort of mid, slightly dark gray on a gray background, I'm basically just parsing values. I'm using value distinctions in order to separate things. And after my character has his lines established, I'm just taking those parts and selecting what parts are going to be darker, where I can start to carve some form in. And you notice I'm only working darker at this point. I'm not moving things forward. I'm not popping things forward. I'm more just taking things and either adding a dark value to it to separate the material and the design, which does add a little bit of depth, or I'm using the darker values to push things back, such as in the pits or in the parts of the neck around that sort of neck piece that this kind of cyborg android armor suit male humanoid dude is. And my goal here was basically just to have a drawing first, because in part one we had a very loose, sort of nebulous, soft edge thing that gradually became more fine and refined. But when you start with a drawing, you can just have a basic fill underneath, usually a mid-gray, because then you can push and pull. So as you see, I've done some of that pushing and pulling already, where I take some of those gray values and I begin to just sort of pop them back, and then I take a couple lighter values and pull them forward, some areas that are going to pop. Now, usually I go about 80% darker and 20% lighter, just because it's easier to show form by pushing things back. At least when I'm working, I feel that way. And you notice, like I said, I'm working with grays here, a lot of different grays, because grays have the most versatility. If you're working with white or if you're working on black, then part 3 is going to be about working on black, but basically it's not as easy to push because you're already as deep as you can go in terms of values, so you only have to pull. You see that one of the keys to adding form is to understand that you only have so many shades to work with from black to white. And when you're working sort of in between in the gray areas, then you have a good sort of mid ground that you can, like I said, push and pull from. So as we fade into the next bit here, you can see that I've been doing just that. I've been pushing areas back, pulling areas forward, and imagining it like sort of an action figure or a like some sort of 3D model. And my light source, as per most kind of concept arty things, is coming mostly from the top. And there's a little bit of it that's going to be not like directly above, but a little off to the side, but still it's above the figure. And this part just takes time. If you want to know more about it, like I said, this tutorial is included. Full length is one of the three paintings that I made in order to solve the problem for artists who have a harder time getting form and dimension and volume and shading into their work. So yeah, check that out in the description box below. It includes, like I said, all the stuff I'm talking about. It has a better breakdown of the jargon and what have you. And this aspect is just, you just gotta kind of run with it. You just take your time, and eventually you'll start to carve back and forth. And in this case, I usually take some trimming of the contours because I'm working not only inside the figure but outside the figure as well. And you see, I'm speaking in terms of like polarization or in terms of a spectrum where there are either two opposite ends, like inside the figure and outside the figure, or black and white. And that's because these are the barometers, these are the gauges that we're going to be using in terms of creating mental models around our process and making sure that we understand that everything is sort of a spectrum of opposites, and playing those opposites in terms of their degree off of one another allows us to uh, put the pieces together in a more intricate way that still has balance and still has equanimity. So, another way to say that is, if you understand opposites and contrast, and that everything has its equal and opposing part, you can then work in between those parts to bring them together in a way that feels more wholesome to the process. So that's just kind of the goal there, is just to make sure that you grab those fundamental aspects of black and white and contour and silhouette and understand what those mean. Because if you don't, then your artistic vocab is limited, and you won't be able to create things at a level that's as high as somebody who understands what those things mean and can deploy them at their behest, really. So, all right, what am I doing? Why did I make some squares and change the value behind them? And the reason I did that is to show you that no matter what sort of background we're working with to pop the figure, because we started in gray, we can go darker, we can go lighter, and the figure still reads because we're in the middle of the spectrum. And we have enough value differentiation within the figure to separate the elements from the background. So he's not blending in too much, and that allows us to have a little fun, like create a shadow if he has a lighter background, or add some shading if he has a darker background. And that's just a little example of what you can do if you understand value structures and can manipulate them in ways that feel much more comfortable and natural to you. It's a huge part of being able to add shading and creating things that feel like they are volumetric. Next, I'm just popping in some shadow action on the full figure because, like anything else, this is just a demonstration. This isn't like the complete end all be all of something I would just render and render on for days like client work. This is just showing you how you can use these tools, like I said, values and different edge works and structures, in order to delineate that form. And so another good way to present your characters is to use a gradient. You see this a lot, once again, with concept art stuff, because it adds a degree of complexity that a flat background doesn't. Sometimes you see like a painterly abstract background because it's all about the design, it's all about the figure. Anyway, here I am adding some rim light, which can help add even more dimension and pop. because light is what is going to give birth to form in the first place. We cannot have form unless we have light. So, really, when we're studying form, we're also studying how light behaves. As with any other visual aspect of creation, we need to have a really solid feeling in our nervous systems about how we can convey the effects of light. And we're not painting it literally. It's not like I'm studying from a photo and doing the exact value range like it would have. I mean, that adds more and more realism, which is wonderful if that's what you're going for. But just understanding the feeling of it, the essence of it, the abstraction of light, and how it works will serve you well when it comes to adding volume to your characters, your environments, your objects, anything you can think of. So that about wraps this one up. Here is the final image for the tutorial. Again, if you want to snatch this one up along with Painting with Form Part 1 and Painting with Form Part 3, that's in the description box below. For only $5, you get all these tutorials at a greater length with greater explanations, and also a little bit of motivational stuff because that's what you guys said you wanted in the survey, in the Power Painter survey I sent out. If you want to answer the survey, it's still open. It's also in the description box. Basically, I put everything in the description box, guys. So my little call to action for you is to go out and fill out that Power Painter survey. Let me know what's working or what you'd like to see more of, and I will do my best to fulfill that. Anyway, hope you learned a little bit, had fun explaining this process to you, giving you some more insight regarding form, values, light, and just different ways of going about that, especially with this process, because it's a fun process and it's one that I use a lot. So thanks for watching, happy painting, and I will see you in the next video. Take care, Power Painter.